So in this video, we'll see common interrogation that React developer fails to understand. So I have this app.jsx here. The app component is rendering home component, and this home component has a state of counter with initial value of 0. So this set interval execute this particular function after every 1 second. So it continuously gets executed. And here we are just taking out the current count and incrementing by 1. So and we are displaying that count on the screen. So if I refresh, you can see count is initially 0, then it becomes 1, and then it remains 1. It does not get incremented. So you can see even though this set interval is getting called, this count is getting incremented, you can see the code is looking fine, but there is one major bug here. So if you add console.log here, count, count, refresh, open console, you can see count is initially 0 and it remains 0, it never increments. So even though I'm saying set count, count plus 1, it never increments. So every time set interval call this particular function, we are incrementing count by 1 only. So 0, this count is 0, count 0 plus 1 becomes 1. So it always remains 1. That's why you always see 1 here. You never see incremented to 2, 3. So initially it's 0, then it will come once and it remains 1. You can see count is getting printed in the console. So log is printed but count is still 0. Why this is happening? This is known as stale closure. So here we have set interval function and we are executing this code. So first time when this code is executed, the value of count was initially 0. So closure gets created here. So what was the initial value of count? That will get executed and that will be used all the time. So the count never increases. It always remains as the initial value it was there. So how can we fix this? So for that, you can add a dependency of count. So what will happen now? Whenever the count changes, you are calling the set interval and you are getting this current updated count. So you might think this will work, but this also creates a problem. So if I save this and refresh, you can see count is incrementing. Count 1, 2, 3, 4, it's incrementing. There is flickering. So you can see there is flickering happening here. 14, 15, 17. You can see it's not correct. So the count is not correctly getting incremented. Why this is happening? Because every time the count changes. So initially count is 0. So this set interval will be called, and after 1 second you are setting count to 1. So it becomes 1. Now count is changed. Now again this use effect will execute. Again you are recreating a new interval. You are again setting this count to 2. So every time count changes, you are creating a new set interval. It's not the same set interval. You are recreating a new set interval function. So this is known as memory leak. So you are unnecessarily creating multiple intervals every time count is changing. So but if we remove the count, then it will not work because it always takes, this creates a closure. This function, whatever function we have defined for the set interval, it becomes a closure, and we always get the initial value and we never get that updated value. So if we save this again, we have the same issue. It becomes 0 to 1 and it remains 1. So how can we fix that? So to fix, there is an easy way. So instead of using count plus 1, you can use updater function syntax. So how do we set state? So you can set state like this, count plus 1, or there is another way, set count. You will get the previous value of count and then you do previous count plus 1. So this is one way and this is another way. So in this previous count, you correctly get the current value of count. So you don't need this particular variable. You automatically get, as you are setting count, you will automatically get the current value of count in this particular variable. So from this function, you are returning this value. So this is implicit return syntax. This is exactly same as writing like this. So you are writing like this only, but as there is a single statement, we simplify it by using implicit return syntax. So you don't need return keyword as this is arrow function. So now if I remove this, Let me remove this. Now if I refresh, you can see every time now the count is incremented, but it's not incremented by 1, it's incremented by 2. So every time count set interval is called, it's incremented by 2 and there is no flickering. So this is working. But the issue is now count is incremented by 2 every time. It should be incremented by 1, right? Why this is happening? Because if you check the package.json, we are using a React version 18, and if you check the main JSX, we are using React strict mode. So whenever you are using a React version 18 and you have strict mode enabled, in that case every use effect hook that you have in your application execute twice. This is just to avoid any issue, and React checks if you are not doing something wrong. So what is happening, this use effect hook is getting called twice. So you are setting this interval twice, which is the wrong thing. So if I add this console.log here inside use effect and save this, let me refresh. You can see inside use effect is executed twice. That means this use effect is getting called twice. So even if there is no dependency, when you are using version 18 of React and there is react.strict mode, your use effect execute twice. So one way is you can remove this react.strict mode, just render this app component. Now if I refresh, you can see there is only one use effect and now the count is incremented correctly by 1. But this is not a solution. You should not remove this strict mode because it helps to avoid issues in your application. So what can you do? So why this is happening, and to fix this issue of incrementing this counter by 2. So right now if you see, if I refresh, the counter is incremented but it's incremented by 2. So because the use effect execute twice, so there are two set intervals running continuously. So you can avoid this by returning a function from use effect. So use effect hook has a cleanup function. So from this use effect hook you can return a function, and inside this function you can do any cleanup activity. So if you have some event in handlers you want to remove, if you want to clear this interval, so this interval gets executed after every 1 second. So you can clear that interval here. So I can use clear interval function, and for this I need to pass that interval. So you can store this in a variable and you can pass it here. So now if I refresh, you can see use effect is executed twice, but now the counter is incremented by only once, not twice. Why this is working properly now? Because whenever the use effect executes, before executing the code that you have inside the use effect, cleanup function is executed. So if I log cleanup and refresh, you can see use it first inside use effect, then clean up, and then again inside use effect. So first time whenever the use effect executes, it executes this code, and next time before executing this code, first this cleanup function is executed. So even though there is no dependency, every time as we are using this react.strict mode, every time the use effect executes, first cleanup function is executed and then your code inside the use effect gets executed. So what is happening, before setting that interval again you are clearing that interval. Now the current value of counter initially is 0, so you make it 0 plus 1 1. Now again whenever the use effect executes, you are clearing that interval. Now because that interval is clear, you have that current value of 1. 1 plus 1 becomes 2. So every time use effect executes, you are clearing that interval and you are executing that code to set that interval again. So this gives you correct code. So whenever you have set interval, you should always make sure you clear that interval. That's very important. Otherwise memory leak might happen. So what is memory leak? So memory leak is like this code is there in the memory, and even though this particular component is unmounted, you are still executing that code. So that code remains in the memory and it keeps executing. So to demonstrate that, let's create a flag here, show set show. So initially false, and if it's show, then only I want to display that home component. and here I will add button toggle show. Now here I will call this set show function. I will use updater syntax. So if the current value or previous show value, you can call it anything, previous show value is true, will make it false by negating it. So now what will happen if I refresh? You can see we have this toggle show. When I click, you see this counter. Why? Because we are displaying that home component. And when that component state becomes false, so whenever I click on that button, show will become false. And when it's false, this home component will not be displayed. So when I again click on this, you can see that home component is not displayed. So you might think everything is correct if you don't have this. So let's me bring this back. So initially it's not displayed, then it's displayed, then again it's not displayed. So you think everything is fine, but this is memory leak. Why? Because if you add log here inside set interval, so let me refresh. So initially nothing is displayed because the home show value is false. When I click on this, you see inside set interval. Now you see this home component. If I clear this and toggle, now home component is not displayed, but if you see the counter is still getting incremented. Inside set interval is still getting printed. You can see it's still getting executed. So this code, whatever you have, is still there in the memory, and it keeps getting executed even if the component is unmounted. So when you hide this particular using this conditional check, home component initially when it's false, it will not be displayed. When it's true, it will be shown, and when it's again false, it will be removed again. So it's unmounted. And but even though it's unmounted, you still have that code keeps getting executing. So that code is still getting executed, so it's still in the memory. So you have some performance issue, so it's known as memory leak. So that code is still in memory, which gets executed again. So you might think this is not a bigger issue, but that's not true. So if you have routing in your application, whenever you go from one route to another route, that particular previous component gets unmounted and new component gets mounted to the route which you are redirecting. So every time you are switching between one component to another, you are again recreating this interval because this home component is again remounted. So if you have menu like home, about, help, then every time you click on home, you are again remounting this component. Again you are setting this interval. When I go to help component or help menu, you are unmounting this home component, but still there is set interval. So this code still exists. But again when you click on home menu, you are again creating a new set interval because this use effect executes again, because you are again remounting that home component. So you have multiple set interval every time you click on home menu. So this is creates a memory leak. You have lot of code intervals added in the memory, so it might degrade your performance, and it might slow down your application. So whenever you are adding some interval, you should always clear that. That's very important thing you should always remember. So whenever inside use effect you are having set interval, you should clear that interval. And in the set count, you should always use this previous state version. It's known as functional syntax of state. So you are using functional way of setting that state. So every time this interval gets called, you are getting the current value of state, and then we are incrementing it by 1. So this cleanup function is very important. From use effect hook, you should return a function which clears that interval. So this is also useful if you have some event handler. So let's say instead of this, let me comment out this. So I have this event handler, scroll event, and let's declare a function handle scroll. Window dot scroll y. So every time I scroll the page, this particular function is executed and you see the current scroll position. So if I refresh, let me show this home component all the time. So you can see nothing is printed because we don't have much content here. So what you can do is, so let me add some paragraphs here. So I have added some extra paragraph just to have some scroll bar. So when I scroll, you can see that scroll position is getting displayed. So whatever the current scroll position, we see this. So we have this event handler added, but we are not clearing that. So what will happen if I am unmounting that component? So when I show value is false, this component will not be displayed. So it will be unmounted. So if I refresh this, when I toggle show, you can see this counter is displayed. And if I scroll, you see this scroll. But if I again click on toggle show, now that component is not there, home component is not there, but still when I scroll, you can see that code is still getting executed. So in memory that code is still there, so it's a memory leak. So you are still executing this particular handle scroll event even after the component is unmounted, which is not good. So in the cleanup function, you should always remove that event handler. Scroll, handle scroll. So if I refresh, so here we are removing that. So if I click on toggle show, now you can see that this particular log is displayed. Now let me click on toggle show again. Now you can see cleanup function is executed and scroll event handler is removed. So if I scroll, now you can see there is no console.log. So this is the best way, and you should always use this cleanup function whenever you have this use effect hook. So use effect hook is the most difficult hook to understand if you are just beginner React developer, because it involves lot of things. You might go into infinite loop as we have seen previously. um, so if you want me to dive deep into this use effect hook and explain it in detail how it works, write in the comment and I will make a new video explaining how the use effect hook works, all the issues that gets created because of those dependencies. So that's it for this video. So the main thing that we started with, you need to remember, whenever you are setting this interval, always use this particular updater function syntax, and this from the cleanup function you need to clear that interval. That's what you should always do, so to get the correct value. And you should avoid removing this strict mode because it identifies issues in your application, as you have seen previously. Because use effect executed twice, the count was incremented twice. So it was not incremented by 1, it was always incremented by 2. So these are the issues you can easily identify if you have this strict mode enabled. There are also other benefits of using strict mode, but you should always keep that and try to avoid these issues by adding this particular cleanup. So that's it for this video. If you found this video useful, do like it and don't forget to subscribe to the channel.